I'm going to try to keep up with the work that I'm doing on this piano. As I'm taking the hinges off, I always want to clean these screws and the chrome while it's still attached to the piano with the old finish. It's just easier to keep it from scratching the new finish when I get ready to put it back together, and it saves me a step at the other end of the process. Picking up all the pieces, taking the top off, taking the front off the piano, now the key cover. There's a lot of screws that have to be removed on these, keeping them organized in a place so that you can put them all back together and not miss any or lose them. Here I am again cleaning the hinge for the finger cover. This speed on this video is anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 times. Trying to cut out a lot of tedious work that just shows me. Here I am cleaning each screw head before using the drill to remove the very small screws. Again, cleaning with the wire brush, very soft wire brush, to polish this and not take off any finish. Pick up all the screws, put the hinge and the screws in the box, take off the other small hinges. As I continue to get the hinges off and put them together, we're going to move on to cleaning up taking the striker plate out for the lock mechanism. This finish that you can see on this part of the piano seems to be shiny and clean and clear. I tend to use a scraper to get the corners and the edges and to remove most of the finish off before using any kind of chemicals on the finish. This is very difficult to remove all the finish without damaging the wood with the scraper blade. Once I get the detail curve done, I'm going to move on to removing the finish on the flat surfaces. This finish on this piano was a shellac base and very distorted and damaged. And you can see as I go along with the razor scraper, it just flies off. It just peels right off. It's not attached to the wood at all. And with chemicals, you end up with a big sloppy mess. I end up with a lot of dust and debris, but it's all just scraped off. And I find this to be a lot less damaging to the wood, and the finish and the color of the wood is not taken away in this process. Now once I get all this scraped down to where the wood is smooth, I can take a sanding sponge and clean it up without taking away a lot of wood or color. You can see this piece has a curve in it, which also makes for a difficult part to strip and clean. Now I'm taking the actual lock out of the finger guard on the piano, trying to dust and get all the loose debris blown out of the piano as I take it apart. There I am removing the action. Now the keys come out, Clean the inside of the cabinet some more. I'm going to tape off those pedestals and bushings because they're very important to keep those at the height they are. That's part of the action adjustments. Now I'm using the same technique of scraping with a blade to remove the finish on the piano. This is a long and tedious process of just holding on to a small scraper blade and working through every side of this piano. As you see, I'm working on the side, the other end right now. The finish on this piano, I can show you, is very, very cracked and checkered, and that's why I tend to use a scraper to remove the dried up and material that just is not stuck to the piano. It's a coating and it just comes right off by peeling it off with a scraper versus trying to sand it off and just consume massive amounts of sandpaper and dust. Here I'm getting ready to do the lower corners. You can actually get a lot closer view of how this process works. You can see the cracks in the veneer in this piece where it's been damaged. After I'm done cleaning and getting all the finish off, I will take and wipe this down with a denatured alcohol. The denatured alcohol tends to blend a lot of this color back across the natural stain and coloring of the wood and covers up most of those small defects and blemishes from the age and the abuse this piano has seen over its lifetime. You can see that this one leg is a little bit loose as we go through and just clean all of the damaged finish off. Here's a good look at how that finish comes off with the scraper up close. And the color just comes back to the piano as I get the aged shellac off. It's a very beautiful red burgundy color. Here's a large piece. I'm using a vacuum handheld scraper for this. You can see some of the scratches even from the scraper, but they will blend in when it's stained and not be noticed. This is a corner of the detail scroll work and carvings, and here I am using a small wire brush and denatured alcohol to loosen out the shellac that's been built up with all the crud and grime over the time. I'm also using a small pick and the edge of a blade to get into that fine detail work. It's very difficult to clean those parts out so that you can see the finished product before and what it looks like after cleaning. Here we're going to move on to fixing a corner of the piano that was damaged by, chewed off by some kind of animal. Routing out the corner, I'm going to chisel that flat, then I'm going to use a small piece of piece of thin plywood to glue in to give me a nice flat surface to glue a new piece of wood to. You can see it clamped up there. That's the piece of veneer, and here's the piece of wood, and I'm going to plane that piece of wood down to make it the right height. Now we cut it off, and then we'll color stain and match it as close as I can get. Put some putty into the cracks. It's not a 100% unnoticeable repair, but it does bring a color back that looks close. Here's the corner of the piano that was damaged. I'm going to take off this piece of trim and make a new piece of trim. Here I am gluing the new trim on. In that clip you can see how damaged the finish was. Now this is looking at the finish after I've gone over it with the denatured alcohol. Everything's been stripped and stained, getting ready for a new coat of shellac to be added to the piano. Here I am staining it to match. Now we're spraying some shellac back onto the piano, and you can start to see how much more the finish has come back to nice and smooth. Looking at all the wood grain, here we are trying to get all of the bubbles and get the finish down to a high gloss with many coats of shellac added to it. Have to do that on the sides. I'm running with a 220 grit sandpaper. Most of the time when I get ready to finish out, I'll run to 320 grit, and then we'll add another layer of shellac. There's probably 15 layers to 20 layers of shellac on each one of these flat surfaces, just to be able to have a nice smooth flat finish. At this point it's time to start using hand sanding it with a sponge just to get the final smoothness out. Here we've gone back to 320 on that, and a few final coats of shellac. More sanding. Takes a lot of coats and light sanding to fill all of the wood grain after having been stripped down bare wood. Here we are adding more coats of shellac. These small pieces of trim have got many coats of shellac, and you'll see me start to work with the hand sponge, sanding these things smooth, getting all of the little bubbles and details out without burning through the shellac on the edges. It's very slow process, getting these corners cut well with the sandpaper without burning through again. Here I am with the finished product, putting the screws in. Now we've got the top lid on, putting all the screws back together. Here's the sticker, which was the original manufacturer name badge, going back onto the keyboard cover. This is a press-on adhesive, and then I will coat that with a coat of shellac over the top of that to seal it. Actually, several coats. At this point, it's time to clean up all of the ivories on the keys. I use a 4/0 steel wool, and it just makes them very smooth and clean and takes the yellowness off from the age of them. It doesn't make them high in gloss, but it does give them a nice finish. I did notice that several of these key tops have been replaced. Not all of them are original ivory. This process took about half an hour to clean all 88 keys. Now we're going to pull the tape off and we're going to start assembling this piano. Now we're going to move on to assembling the action back into the piano. The pieces for either side of the keyboard and the finger guard, and then the top. These pieces, laying them out, getting all the original screws and putting them back. Here we are putting the striker lock back in for the finger guard, and then the lock plate back onto the key cover, replacing the screws that hold the finger guard in place. We're going to attach the hinge back onto the key cover first, then we'll put it together and put it onto the actual piano. Keep in mind that there is a lot of very, very tiny screws in this process. And even though I took them out with a drill, I am putting them back in by hand to make sure that they're not stripped. And if they are, I'm repairing the holes for all of the screws to hold fast into this cover. There are a lot of screws. I should count them one of these times. And it varies from hinge to hinge and piano to piano. And sometimes the hinges are offset screw holes. And so making sure that you have the hinge back on the right way is very critical. Screw holes start from one side at a different place than the other end. And you have to make sure you put the hinge back on the way it came off. Here we have the second part of the key cover going onto and getting screwed together. Again, all this done by hand screwdriver to attach these screws, turning it over, attaching the hinges that attach this part to the rail across the keys. Here it's setting in place. We're about to run all the screws down in there. There are 4 small hinges, each of them having 3 screws attaching it. All these screws go in there. This is all reattached. Now you can see that it opens and closes. Yeah. Have the finish. The decal is on it. I put the top plate over the keys. It covers the lid when it's up. Now we're assembling the top of the piano, the front. Putting all the screws back in there for the hinge that opens and closes that top. This is where a good look of what it looks like all finished compared to the dark color that it had and the raw finish before.